This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's special guest is a legendary multi-award winning singer, songwriter, humanitarian, activist, and author who is universally beloved for her sublime, angelic voice, her imaginative interpretations of traditional and contemporary folk standards, her wonderfully eclectic repertoire, and her bold yet vulnerable, deeply poignant original compositions. She's released over 55 albums, many of which have been certified gold and platinum. And she's had over 24 hit singles, including Both Sides Now, which won a Grammy Award for Best Folk Recording and has been entered into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Her recording of Send in the Clowns earned her a Grammy nomination for Best Pop Vocal Performance, and the song won the Grammy Award in 1976 for Song of the Year. And in 2017, her rendition of Amazing Grace was selected for preservation by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Her other hit singles include Someday Soon, Chelsea Morning, Turn, 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 Hard Times for Lovers, Home Again, Fires of Eden, and many, many more. She's received 5 more Grammy nominations, including one for her most recent album, Spellbound, for Best Folk Album. Her television specials and DVD concerts, including Christmas at the Biltmore Estate, Live at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Live in Ireland, and Wildflowers in Concert, were highly acclaimed and won numerous awards. She received an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature for her 1974 film, Antonia, A Portrait of the Woman. In the 90s, she was a UNICEF International Ambassador for the Arts and traveled to many places, including Yugoslavia and Vietnam, spreading her message of peace, unity, and love. And she's received a whole slew of other prestigious awards and accolades, including being inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, receiving an honorary doctorate, receiving numerous Lifetime Achievement Awards, and being given the Golden Plate Award by the American Academy of Achievement. She's written 9 books: Trust Your Heart, Amazing Grace, Shameless, Singing Lessons, Sanity and Grace, A Journey of Suicide, Survival, and Strength, The 7 T's, Finding Hope and Healing in the Wake of Tragedy, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, My Life in Music, Cravings, How I Conquered Food, and her brand new book of poetry entitled Sometimes It's Heaven, Poetry of Love, Loss, and Redemption. I'm delighted and deeply honored to welcome the incomparable Judy Collins to our show. Judy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. My head is swirling with the names and the numbers and the years, many years. It's been many years that I did all these things, not all at once.
But boy, did you achieve a lot. Now, you were a classically trained pianist as a child, but you gravitated very early on to folk music because you said it resonated with you in a way that made you feel you could change the world. Did you know at that very young age what it was about the world that you wanted to change?
Well, I grew up at the dinner table of a man who was conscious of all kinds of things. My father, Chuck Collins, was a singer, a songwriter, and an entertainer, and he read like a fiend, and he was so smart. And he taught us all at the dinner table that we had to be aware and we had to be understanding that we had a part to play in the world. And we would decide what that part was, but we had to be conscious. And I think that's where I started to be conscious when I was a kid at the dinner table.
I'm so glad you mentioned your father, Chuck Collins. He was a very successful and charismatic radio performer. He was also blind. You said that he saw more than anyone you've ever known, and yet you said you often felt invisible to him, and in a way you spent your whole life trying to get him to see you. Do you think you finally succeeded?
I believe so. I believe so. My father was extraordinary in every way. And of course, the thing that I remember everything about him, but when he was 4, he was going blind, and my great grandfather was out in the field with him near Nez Perce, Idaho, which is where they lived. They weren't American Indians, but he grew up. He was born on the Nez Perce reservation, and he was 4 years old, and he was clapping in the field. And my great grandfather said to him, "Charlie, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm listening to the barn." That's the way he learned to train his ears to be his eyes. He was so smart, and he was so wonderful as an entertainer. People adored him. And yes, and I got my inspiration from him for every reason that there is.
You wrote your song, My Father, about your dad. Did he live long enough to hear you sing it?
I was writing this song, and I called a friend of mine to listen to it. I would always do that nowadays. I never did that in those days because I wrote very few songs. But I called my friend Tom, and I said, "I want you to hear this." And I sang him the song for my father. My father was meantime dying in a hospital at St. Luke's in Denver, Colorado, and he was gone within the next 48 hours. So he never heard the song. But I figure that he's heard it so many times on my shows, and that he'll get it, that it was for him.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you became known very early on in your career, not only as a great singer with the voice of an angel, but as a social activist and a force for change. And I'm referring to the anti war movement, the civil rights movement, the fight for racial equality, and advocacy for freedom of speech. How much of your growth as an artist do you attribute to your dreams and your values as an advocate for social justice?
Well, one without the other wouldn't have happened, I'm sure, because there's an energy and a feeling of knowing that you have to do something, knowing that you're in a vulnerable time. I think the war in Vietnam, I was married to my starter husband, I always call him. He was a young student at the University of Colorado, and all of the students in 1959, everybody there at the University of Colorado was aware of the war in Vietnam. Other people weren't so much later they were aware, but the kids in the University of Colorado in Boulder, they were very, very with it, and they were very much involved. They already knew that the Army had advisors in Vietnam, and they knew that there was already a death. The first death was in 57, and they saw through the perimeter of youth and intelligence that there was something hot going on that we better pay attention. And so that's what I first became aware of. But also at the dinner table, as I said, I was aware of the lack in certain areas of help for people. And that became, my father was a big fan of Goodwill, and he was their spokesperson for a while. And he also was head of the department for the blind in Denver. He never used a dog or a cane. He always used his elocution to get around. So he didn't want a dog, he didn't want a cane. But when they came to town to talk to him about big projects for the World Blinds Association, he would pull out this little cane and walk around with it like he used it. He didn't. I mean, he was funny, but he didn't want to use a cane. He didn't want to use a dog. Well, that was his particular fight. I mean, it caused him a lot of bruises, I must say, over the years. But it was, in a way, sort of symbolic of his going his own way. And he went his own way, and he taught us to go our own way. So I thought about things in a way that was influenced by Dad, and that he talked about on television. He talked about the war. He talked about McCarthy. He talked about MacArthur. He talked about people. He read poetry that was about people and about life. And so I've tried in my own way to be aware of what people are doing, what they're thinking, how they're going about their lives. And music always has a part. People come away from a big concert where they've been singing, and they sort of have changed. I always think nowadays, I have thought about it for a while. I'm in a concert, doing a concert, and I have my pianist with me sometimes, my pedal steel player, a couple of other people. Sunday night, I'll be in somewhere where I have a whole bunch of people with me, just because that's an adventure. And what I know is that people in the audience have a chance to sit for 2 hours. They have a chance to reflect, very rare in our time. They reflect, they focus. They can't get on their phones. They can't talk to me. They can't talk to their other friends or they'd get thrown out of the show. So they have this precious time to think while they're listening. And I find that it's a privilege to be able to do that with people. I'm going through my own agenda of dreams, of thoughts, of perspective. And sometimes, somebody used to say, I go through the laundry list. I don't go through the laundry list. My imagination runs on with me, and I know that happens with other people. So it's a privilege to be able to sit and know that people have had a chance in the silence to think of their own thoughts and also to change their minds about things. And I think that's a privilege too.
Well, I've had the privilege of being in the audience, and I have to tell you, you have a way, Judy, of singing a song as though it was written just for the listener. You are such a unique singer because of your perfect pitch, your clarity, your phrasing. And when I look at your song choices over the years, especially songs written by others, you seem to have an innate sense of knowing whether a song is right for you, not only melodically, but lyrically. Has that instinct always come easy to you?
Well, my mother always said, don't think you learned this on your own. This was your father's influence. And he sang the great songs. He got everything, of course, from the Library of Congress, where my archives sit today, including Both Sides Now and Amazing Grace and other things. But all my archives are there. And he would get from the Library of Congress these big Braille books to read, and he'd also get recordings. And so I would hear of the great English actors doing Shakespeare, and I would hear so many things. And I think that listening to a voice, I'm very picky about voices. If I'm reading a book, I read a lot of books now in audio. My sister ruined my relationship with real books because she always had audiobooks for a long time because she's a painter. So she can paint and listen, and I could never do that. But now I go to sleep to I have to admit, to books on tape in audio, and I'm very particular about the voice. If it's not the right voice, I put it aside. I don't listen to it, and I have some favorites. A lot of them are English, Irish, Scottish, Ian Rankin, of course, Peter Granger's reader, whose name is Gildart Jackson. Gildart Jackson, to me, is a great hero of the written book because he's a genius at reading. So, somewhere, I think the clarity comes from my teacher, Max Margulies, who taught me when I was losing my voice in 1965. I asked one of the people in New York for direction. I wanted a singing teacher, but I wanted somebody who was a genius. And they sent me to this fellow named Max Margulies, who taught something called bel canto, which means beautiful voice. It's the form of singing that all of the amazing tenors, those singers know how to sing. And that's what Max taught me. He taught me, and we listened to four different singers. We listened to Pavarotti, Frank Sinatra, we listened to Ella Fitzgerald, and we listened to three singers, maybe another one. But anyway, we just listened to certain singers for what they did, for their phrasing, for their clarity, and that's where I learned it. And so I studied with him for 32 years, and I can sing anywhere, anytime. I mean, it's a gift from God and from Max.
Well, when I look at your career, Judy, I think it's very important to note that back in the 60s, you were not as obsessed as some folk singers were with keeping folk music pure, for lack of a better word. Starting with your third album, you began recording songs written by contemporary writers like Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, Shel Silverstein, Jim Friedman. And because of your willingness to be progressive, you helped folk music to keep evolving and to remain current. Did you
Yeah.
realize back then that that's what you were doing for the genre?
Well, again, it's the ear that I learned from my father. I learned to find the good songs. I learned to hear them. He would get the shows from the Library of Congress and he'd put on the record and he'd play through it and he would say, okay, that one and that one and that one and that. I don't want to hear the rest. And that's the way I am. If I hear a song written by Ian and Sylvia, uh, then I say I'm in love with it. But if I don't love it, I don't ever want to hear it again.
Oh, that makes sense. Bob Dylan said he wrote the song I'll Keep It With Mine for You, but you released the song only as a single. You never put it on an album. Why
I
not?
don't know. I don't know why. Maybe it's time for me to do that now. I think I should.
Oh, I hope you do. Stephen Stills wrote Sweet Judy Blue Eyes for You. What goes through your mind when you hear that song?
Oh, I'm in love. I'm in love again. I love that song. I always say that I had an affair with him in 1968 when he was on the in the band that I recorded an album called Who Knows Where the Time Goes. And I didn't know that he was already a fan. He was already a fan. He said he used to go to sing at the basket clubs, they used to call them, where you pass the basket. And Elaine, you'd pass the basket, and sometimes you didn't even get the basket back. And he said he'd go home from these shows. He's 6 years younger than I, so it fit, the pattern. And so he'd go to these shows and he'd come home and listen to Judy Collins because he had my records. I didn't know that. But when I met him in 68, he was excited to be on the show and to be on the recording session. We did good. We had a good time. And then we had an affair. And I always say, we had an affair long enough for him to write a song about me, and then I left.
Well, in 1968, Stephen Stills wrote another very poignant song about you called Judy, which was released in
Oh,
2007 on a CD called Just Roll Tape.
Judy, da, da, da,
How did
da,
it
da.
feel to hear that song 40 years after Stephen wrote it?
Well, I was in shock because I didn't know anything about this recording that he made. We finished the sessions, and then my engineer, John Haney, who sadly is gone today, he lived out his life in Australia. He was a wonderful guy. I knew him later when he lived in Australia. Anyway, he was fabulous. So Stephen had the nerve to say to him, "Could you let the machines roll? And when I'm through, I'll turn them off. But meantime, you can leave." So that's what happened. He let the machines roll, and he sang all these songs about me, including Sweet Judy Blue Eyes and Judy.
Well, I want to know, Judy, if you had heard the song back in 1968 when Stephen Stills wrote it, do you think it would have changed anything in your relationship with him?
Oh, I don't think so. He didn't like two things. He didn't like New York and he didn't like therapy, and I was in both. So I skedaddled home. And what happened to me then was interesting because the man who ran the New York Public Theater called me up and he said, "Would you like to do a musical in the park in Delacorte Theater?" And I said, "No." And then I thought about it for a while. So Joe Papp called me again and he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Well, send me the songs. Let me see. What is it?" And he said, "It's called Peer Gynt, and it is an English translation of the great Norwegian writer. And Stacy Keach is in it. And the songs were written by John Morris. John Morris wrote a lot of songs for Mel Brooks. He wrote all the music for Blazing Saddles. And I thought, "Oh, I don't know." And then I heard the songs. He sent me the songs. They were gorgeous. I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And so I spent the summer of 1969 performing in the park, in the Delacorte Park with Stacy Keach. And Stacy Keach and I wound up having an affair for 4 years. And actually, the apartment that I moved into in 1970 is where I live now. And I was in the theater for those years, that summer with Stacy Keach, and it was a wonderful experience. I mean, I was in the park, and at night people would come backstage, and the songs were so beautiful. I was playing Solveig, who is his girlfriend, and so I played the part, And then afterwards, we drove up to the site of the big festival that was held there in the mountains of Massachusetts, rather. And I didn't go. I went to the door. Bill Graham was there, and he said, "Do you want to ride in the helicopter to the stage?" And I said, "Do you want me to sing?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go up to listen to play in the Berkshires," which is what I did. So I didn't get to that festival ever. But they were singing Sweet Judy Blue Eyes on that stage when I went to that door.
That's amazing. I want to ask you about your long-standing friendship with Joan Baez. You performed Diamonds and Rust with her on stage at her 75th birthday celebration in 2016. Did it bother you, Judy, that the media always tried to treat you and Joan Baez as rivals and tried to pit you against each other when you were friends?
Ah, yes, we were friends for a long time. Joan is wonderful. I adore her, and I adored her sister Mimi. They were good friends, and they were people who cared about life on the planet and who did things and who were activists, and we all were. But they were my good friends. I will tell you that the night my husband died on December 3rd, this past December. So
Our
it's
beloved Lewis, my deepest condolences.
for the love of Lewis. It's terrible to go through. It's heartbreaking. He was 88 years old. He was the love of my life. I spent 46 years with him. That night, my family was here. Oh, God bless my family. They are so wonderful. My sister, my granddaughter, my nephews, my nieces, you know, they were at the hospital with me. They were round the clock. And they're just special. So the day after he died at 4:59 the night before. And the fourth, we all gathered, and I said, "Well, why don't we go to the museum, go to the Metropolitan?" And we went. Well, it was too much for me. I mean, I spent 46 years going to the Metropolitan with Lewis, and I broke down. I could not do it. And I got home and I went to bed in the afternoon. I went to bed about 6 o'clock. And at 8:30, the phone rang. And the phone in my house, it's either my cell phone, always, hardly my landline. And it was my landline. I picked it up. It was Joan Baez. We talked for an hour. It lifted me off the ground. She was in California, I was in New York. She lifted me up. We laughed, we cried, we talked about our fathers, we talked about our husbands. We talked and talked for an hour, and I went back to sleep and slept like a log. Joan Baez was that kind of friend.
That's very
So
moving. Very, very
it was
moving that she
so
did that.
touching to me. And Mimi and Joan and I and her mother, we could laugh till the end of the earth. We could laugh. We would howl with laughter together. They were always funny, the two of them together, Joan and Mimi. Unbelievable. I mean, I think that Pauline was somewhat in the era of humor, but when we were together, there was no stopping the laughter.
Wow. And what a combination of talent. I mean, that performance of the two of you on the stage, Diamonds and Rust, is a must see. I also want to ask you if it's true that you were the one who convinced Leonard Cohen to overcome his stage fright and perform his songs on stage. Was that true?
Yes, it was. We met through his old friend, Mary Martin, not the one who flies, but a friend of his who went to school with him in Canada, of course. And they went to this college together. They were very good friends. They lived in the same neighborhood. And everyone in her crowd thought that Leonard was the smartest person they ever knew. But they were upset because he was writing poetry and they thought it was obscure and they didn't think he was going anywhere. So I heard that from Mary's lips because she worked in New York. She worked for Bob Dylan's manager, and she worked for Warner Brothers. So she was in the music business just like I was, and we would meet and have dinner and carry on. And she would tell me. And then a couple of years later, she called me up and she said, Leonard wants to come and see you. He wants to come and play you his songs. And I said, are they obscure? And she said, oh, yes, they're obscure. So he came to my door, and I said to myself, I don't care if he can't write songs. We'll see what we can do. Anyway, he walked in and he said, I can't sing and I can't play the guitar and I don't know if this is a song. And then he sang me, Suzanne takes you down to her place by the river. And I said, Leonard, that is a song. And I'm recording it tomorrow, which I did. Then he came back to me and he said, well, now you've made me famous. And I said, yes, but I said, you have to figure out that you sing your own songs. I mean, everybody now was singing his song. Everybody was recording Suzanne. And I said, you have to sing your own songs. They have to hear you sing. So I took him to this big event in a big theater in the Village. The Village Theater it was called. Later on, it was called something else, some rock and roll place. And it was a huge place. And I pushed him out on stage and I said, okay, you sing this song. Well, he got out there and he started to sing and he burst into tears and he walked off the stage. And I hadn't seen what happened. I was backstage, waiting for him. And then I said, well, then you have to go out with me and you have to sing Suzanne. Absolutely. So I convinced him. He came out. I let him sing the whole song. People went nuts. I can't tell you. This happens occasionally to somebody who, well, you've seen it on, The Song Is Right or whatever they're called. These fancy places where people audition and the crowd goes nuts and they suddenly have a career. That's what happened with Leonard. Overnight, he was a sensation and he never stopped singing his songs.
Well, he returned the favor by encouraging you to become a songwriter.
Yes, he did. He said, I don't know why you're not writing your own songs. And I went home to my Steinway and I wrote, what I'll give you since you've asked is all my time together. And that was my very first song. And I've never stopped writing.
When you're on stage performing a song that you've written, does it feel different than when you're performing a song that someone else wrote?
Well, in some ways it does, but I have to treat them the same way. They have to be given the same consideration. I have to look carefully at how I want to arrange them. But finally, when I'm singing them, yes. But on the other hand, a song that I choose becomes my own. That makes sense. Yoko Ono told me one day, she said, a song has a mind of its own. And she's right. Otherwise, every song would go to every person. That doesn't happen. Only certain people choose to sing certain songs. And I'm in, I hope, a league of my own because I choose my own songs. I never have anything pushed at me or insisted on or anything else. Never from the start. Would have an agreement. I'd say, well, that's interesting if they brought something to me, but I'd say, no, how about this? I just found this in my life and I want to sing that.
Well, one of my favorite albums of yours is Whales and Nightingales, which includes your song Farewell to Tawarthi,
Oh.
which features the sounds of real whales singing. Where did you get the idea to incorporate the sounds of those whales?
Well, when I was at the Delacorte Theater in New York City in the park that summer, people would come over after the show and they'd walk up to the door and you'd say hello. So this guy walked up after the show, big, tall guy, and he said, my name is Roger Payne, and I'm a cytologist. I thought he meant a gynecologist. No, he said, I study whales. And I want you to have this. And he handed me a tape of the singing whales he had just made this tape in Bermuda. It's the first time that the whales had been singing, that he got them on tape. And he said, I want you to take this home with you and play it and just figure out what to do with it. So I took it home and apparently I was listening to a lot of English, Irish, and Scottish whaling songs. And the one I picked out was Farewell to Tarwathie, adieu Mormon Hill, and the dear land of Crimond, I bid thee farewell. And so that song is married to the track of the whales singing.
It's a magnificent track. You gave
Yeah.
me goosebumps like you don't want to know. I mentioned the album Whales and Nightingales because it also includes your recording of Amazing Grace, which you recorded a cappella in St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University. Judy,
I
were you surprised when that song became such a huge hit?
I was amazed, amazed. I had just sung the song. I was involved in an encounter group, and a bunch of my friends were in it too. And one night we were at the old apartment. We were around, sitting around and talking and so on. And my producer was also in the group, and Jack Holzman. A lot of my friends were in the group. And he said, I think you better sing something because people are getting on each other's nerves. I think there might be physical encounters here. So why don't you sing something? And sang Amazing Grace because my grandmother had taught it to me. I had never sung it in public. And I sang it and everybody calmed down. And the next day he called me and he said, we have to record that song. And the first thing we did was to record it with instruments. Well, that was not going to work out. So then I said, let's go record it a cappella with a bunch of friends, and let's go up to the church, St. Paul's, on Columbia campus, Columbia University campus. It's a beautiful church. And we recorded 3 songs there. We recorded Farewell to Tarwathie, and Amazing Grace, and some other song, I forget. But that's where we did that. Bill Moyers made an album of different people around the country singing Amazing Grace. It was a wonderful album. And he said that everywhere he went, he would say, can you sing your version of Amazing Grace? And they'd say, sure, but you ought to hear Judy's. So he came to the church and we recorded it there. And that's where I became friends with Judith and Bill Moyers, who are my dear friends to this day. I
Well,
love
that
them.
recording is so memorable. It's so healing. And of course, I have to mention your recording of Send in the Clowns, which gave Stephen Sondheim his very first top 10 hit single, as well as a Grammy Award for Song of the Year. I'm sure you know, Judy, that although dozens of other singers have recorded Send in the Clowns, your version is by far the most popular in terms of record sales and radio play. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's amazing. What's amazing, it went to England first and it was on the charts for 75 weeks, I think. And then it hit here. God bless him, Stephen Sondheim. He forever insisted that Frank Sinatra had the hit. And I said, it's okay. It's all right. I don't mind.
Oh, no, no, you had the hit. And while we're talking about classic songs, I have to mention that Sammy Fain, who was the composer of I'll Be Seeing You, always said publicly that your rendition of that song was his favorite. That must be so gratifying when you get a compliment like that.
Well, you know what? I knew Sammy. He was a wonderful man, and I said to him, "I'll bet you say that to all the girls." No, no, he was very specific about it. But it had its roots really in my father singing it. And I think that that's where my impulse to record it came from, too. That song was the tops, and you had to sing it if you were a singer, and I did. And I'm
Oh,
so
did
happy that
you
I
ever? Did you ever? You know, you are known for always having maintained control over the sound of your voice on your albums.
Oh,
Has
yeah.
that sometimes been difficult in dealing with record companies or producers?
Oh, it wasn't record companies, except in one case. It was producers. And I had a couple of producers who wanted it their way, and they didn't get it that way. And in 1984, it was the end of my contract with Elektra. I had started making records for Elektra in 1961. And so 84 was the end of my run because Bob took over Elektra, was going to destroy all of Jack Holzman's creation. at Elektra. He was going to get rid of all of them if possible. I was one among many. I tried making this album with somebody who's very famous, and his line producer and I worked together beautifully. This was an album called Home Again. And I then fought with the producer himself because he wouldn't listen to me. And he said things like, oh, they're going to hear all the words on this song. He was irreverent. He was rude. He was unprofessional. I'll never mention his name. But at that point, I said to the guy at A&R here in New York, I always recorded in New York, and I said to Milton walked around with a black hat on, a cigar in his mouth, and a black suit. He ran the joint. And I said, Milton, is there anybody here who can be malleable and understanding about the way I want my voice recorded? He said, yes, there is. I'm still working with him. And his name is Alan Silverman. He is a genius. And I have made everything since I recorded in 84. I've done everything with him, everything except one thing, which was an accident. He is a genius, Alan Silverman, a total genius. And everything I've done, he came to me like this angel who knew what to do and who knew what I wanted to do. So I don't know that I've ever been asked this question before, and I've never answered it in full either. But I want to know and have you know that Alan Silverman is a genius, and he's responsible for my sounding the way I do for all these years.
Well, God bless him. God bless you for sticking to your own instincts. I want to read you something you wrote that touched me very deeply in your book, Singing Lessons. You said, singing for me is the place of power at the center of being. Singing gives me peace and lifts my heart. Singing has saved me, taught me, healed me. Singing pulls me inward, and in going inward, I am released. Singing brought me to the heart of my grief and let me move through it. When I sing, I feel totally alive to everything in my existence, the good, the miraculous, the unbearable. Judy, my question to you is, deep down inside, do you get that your singing means exactly all of that to the millions of people who love you?
Well, I'm lucky that I have you, all of you in my life, because that's my resonance, that's my sounding board. And when I sing, and pretty much in my history since finding Max in 1965, since I've studied with him and since I've learned it, I haven't really, I've had to cancel a few. I never canceled in the old days. After the pandemic, I started getting little things like this galloping cough that I couldn't get rid of. But mainly in my career, I haven't had to cancel except since then and a couple of times. Well, once it was said that I had tuberculosis, so I had to quit for 6 months. And once I had to stop drinking and I had to quit for about a year and a half. But otherwise, I've been singing for 85 years, pretty much. Even when I was sick, I would sing. So I am just entirely blessed by the fact that I have an instrument that will hold up as long as I take good care of it, and that will be portable, because that means I can carry it anywhere. That's why I love to tour. I think, certain people don't love to tour. I love to tour, and I make a living. So that could change a little bit, who knows? But the fact is, I know that people listen. I do know, and it saves my life.
Well, you've saved many lives yourself. You've also saved people through your writing. You've written some very emotionally powerful books over the years. And in those books, you've chosen to share your innermost thoughts, Judy, your anguish, your anxieties, your deepest pain, your intimate relationships, the tragic loss of your dear, beautiful son, Clark, your addictions, of course, your many great successes and triumphs in your life as well. Many musicians simply express themselves through their songwriting, but you've gone way beyond that. Why is it so important for you that we know who you really are?
Well, I guess it's the job of somebody who's a public person as well as a private person. I encompass all of them, which is very interesting because you're right in the sense that usually we have one line of access to get to our audiences, but I have the writing. I've always written. I've written journals for decades. And I finally wrote a book in 1987. It was released. It was called Trust Your Heart. And on the other hand, I wrote a number of books, as you said. I've written 9 or so, 10. This book of poetry that I've written is probably my eighth, ninth, or 10th book. And I'm working on a few others. I've got a lot. I have a lot to say, as my sister will tell me, you have a lot to say. And I do. But I'm a communicator, I'm a singer, I'm a talker. I love to talk.
I think you're a teacher and a healer, if I may be so bold, having read 4 of your books. In one of your books, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, you said this about your alcohol problem. I'm quoting you here. It took me 23 years to figure out that I did not drink because of my problems. I had problems because I drank. Judy, most people say the opposite. They say that they drank as a way of escaping their problems. How did
Yeah.
you come to realize that that was not the case for you?
Because I was dying. It was very simple. In 1977, it was all over. I had worked very well through the alcoholism, and I had been very productive and very creative about ways I handled it. But it was over. I had lost my voice from a hemangioma on the vocal cord. It's what happens with veins on a person's face who drinks. And mine just happened to go down to the throat, to the vocal cord, and I couldn't sing. I would go out, I would sing for a night, I'd walk off stage and lose my voice. And this kept happening. In fact, it was engendered by the alcohol drinking and then complicated by the fact that there was no cure. And so for 77, I canceled. A friend of mine said, I saw in Hollywood that you had canceled on one of these posters. It said you had canceled something like 40 or 50 shows that year, which destroyed my career for that year. I had hits that were going strong on both sides. On Sending the Clowns, that was helping me out, but I was in bad shape. And by the end of the year, I had had the surgery, which was a surgery that worked. And they got my doctor, wonderful, wonderful man. And he was operating with a procedure which was brand new. It was a laser procedure. He said, if you don't do it, you're not going to sing at all anyway. If you do it, you'll have a half a chance because I think that this might work. And it did. For about a year and a half, I did nothing but get over my alcoholism and recover quickly from I think it would call it a procedure on my cord. And so, by the way, my first album was Hard Times for Lovers. It took me about a year and a half to get back on the stage. I had a year and a half where I couldn't work at all. But I met Lewis at the start before I got sober in April of 1978. We met and we've always been together. We're still together.
Yes, you are, and he'll always watch over you. You helped a lot of people understand alcoholism in your book, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. I want to read you something you wrote in that book that touched me deeply. You said, I have always felt that how you treat your friends, how you vote, and where you put your money and your energy are the things that count in your personal politics. From the very early days of my career, the music I loved connected directly to political and social currents swirling around me, whether it was voter registration, fighting for civil rights, women's rights, or ending the Vietnam War. These two worlds, music and politics, had forever become one. Judy, do you think there are many musicians today who have that same courage to inject personal politics into their music?
Sure, I think there are. I think there are. And if they're not, they're standing there waiting to join the crowd. I think that human nature and music have everything to gain by joining forces.
Well, Miss Judy Collins, I have only one more question for you, and it's this. In the spring of 1968, when you met Janis Joplin at the Troubadour, she said to you, "One of us is going to make it, and it's not going to be me." So let me ask you, Judy, when you look back at your life and your career, are you surprised that you were the one who made it?
Well, I was surprised at her question because I don't think we were sitting at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. We were watching a wonderful singer, and my friend John Cook was her road manager, Janis's road manager. He was a wonderful guy. He was Alistair Cook's son, and we'd gone to the Troubadour. And we sat down with Janis, and she started talking to me and saying this. I knew how much she drank because it was so out there. It was always out there. Her favorite alcohol was out there. And I didn't think that people knew about my drinking, but she did. And I was stunned. And the fact that I remember it is interesting because I thought I was bowled over then, and she died rather early. And of course, I don't know. I was surprised. I wouldn't have taken it for much that beyond just a casual comment. But I think she did see something. I think she, as an active alcoholic, knew what she was looking at.
She saw it, and the fact that you have the resilience, that you understand how to harness your pain, your anguish, all the therapy that you've had over the years, your ability to use your creativity to heal yourself and to heal other people is so remarkably unique. It's been an enormous honor and privilege meeting you and having this opportunity to interview you. Thank you for all the beautiful music, the comfort, the inspiration. And most of all, thank you so much, Judy, for taking the time to appear on our show.
What a wonderful time I've had. You make me think of things that I had forgotten, and you give me courage to go on. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Harvey. Mm.
Believe me, it's a pleasure. And I speak for all your fans when I tell you that you have brought so much joy and so much comfort to millions of people all over the world, and you always will. Our guest has been the legendary singer, songwriter, humanitarian, social activist, author, and poet, the one and only Judy Collins. Her new book of poetry, entitled Sometimes It's Heaven, Poems of Love, Loss, and Redemption, is now available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. For more information about Judy Collins and to see her concert tour schedule, please visit her official website, judycollins.com. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you. God bless you, Harvey.
Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sheralampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.